To me, there's a real problem with people's perception of old trees, in that if they have any rot, if they have any death on them, people assume that they're sick, and they're doing them a favor by cutting them down, like putting them out of their misery, and it's maddening. So this is something I work on a lot, is like talking about heart rot, like talking about how incredible ecologically heart rot is, and also it's not killing the tree.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Hip, hip, hooray! I think it was about a week ago, I was passing by this magnificent tree that I'm always checking out anytime I am in downtown Amherst, Massachusetts. This is a glorious tree that I'm sure has been around ever since Emily Dickinson, who's a very famous poet that lived in town, was there. Okay, so we're dating back like 100 plus years ago, right? And the thing about this tree is the center is completely hollowed out, but the crown is glorious, and the way the trunk curves, like spirals up into the canopy is a sight to behold. I can't wait to see it during blossom time. And thankfully, the powers that be have not taken that tree down yet. They haven't cut it saying, oh, it's providing no value and let's take it out of its suffering, which is exactly what Eliza Greenman, who was bringing us into this here episode 354, is talking about. And part of the education for homeowners and governments and, again, the powers that be, who might think that a tree is suffering or dying and want to take it down, we need to educate them that indeed it is not. There's, 1,000 different little creatures living on that tree right now. What it is providing both visually, artistically to the common is undeniable. If Emily Dickinson passed in 1886, so you're talking a little under 150 years old, which is not unusual for trees in New England to be found at that age. I mean, we have them all over the map, not just New England, that are 150 years old. And that really tells you something. And I'll tell you, when the springtime comes, that tree is absolutely beautiful. I'm going to recommend that you check out, it's a while back now, but it's on the Cider Chat TikTok channel there, of that tree. So you'd have to scroll through and look for an apple tree in full bloom, because I took a photo of it. I was just gaga. I stopped in my tracks when I saw it in full bloom and, found a parking spot, got out of my car. People were picnicking all around. I walked up to the tree and it was just like communion with the tree. Ooh la la, in full bloom, something that old and so grand. It just takes my breath away. So that's a little bit about what Eliza Greenman was talking about, who brought us into this here episode. And you're going to be hearing more from Eliza and a whole amazing list of folks in the featured presentation this week, which is pre-recorded at Maine Apple Camp. And the topic is historical varieties of apples and pears. And kind of talking about that preservation piece once again, and so much more. So stay tuned for that. And meanwhile, a bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. I have another great letter from a patron of Cider Chat that I'm going to share with you. Let me get right into it, because it kind of give you a little bit of the backstory who this person is, because I've known them for a while, and it's really exciting. Anywho, it goes, Hi Ria, congratulations on the start of Season 8 of Cider Chat. I've had the pleasure of listening to your podcast since Season 1, back when I was still in the early days of my cider journey, and I can't thank you enough for all the cider knowledge you share on your podcast. I've learned so much from listening over the years, and having had the privilege of going on the first Totally Cider tour to Normandy with you, and I'm excited to share that I'm officially putting that cider knowledge to use. My spouse, Eric, and I have recently become the new owners of Press Then Press, an online cider retailer based out of Seattle, Washington. We carry a large selection of ciders from all over the world and can ship to most states. Given the value of what we've learned from Cider Chat over the years, not to mention the inspiration you provided us that has led us to this point in our cider journey, it only makes sense that we support the Cider Going Up campaign. Thank you for all you're doing to elevate cider. Cheers, Story, Madrid. So Story has been part of Cider Chat for a while because she became a patron way back when, like early on the days when she first started listening as a cider enthusiast. And now, all these years later, after going on a Totally Cider tour, not once but twice, we went to France together, and then also we met up in Monterey Bay, going into like the Santa Cruz County area and going to Martinelli's, like a really super, super special tour, which is 1 part cider and really 2 parts people, because the people on the tour always really make it, and that's just mind-boggling to me. That's another topic. Anywho, what I do want to say is they have taken on this business, Press Then Press, and we're going to be hearing more about it because at CiderCon, I will be having a sit-down with both Story and Eric to find out more about their plans with Press Then Press, what the setup is, some of the ciders that they're offering. So I look forward to that. I look forward anytime I get to hang out with them. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing about that too as we have that sit-down conversation. So wait for that. This here podcast episode gets released on February 1st, 2023. So if you're listening today or the next 2 days and you want to get a little bit more of Cider Chat and some fun stuff, then I really recommend that not only to hit the subscribe button for this here podcast, but also to subscribe to the Cider Chat YouTube channel. Because on Saturday, February 4th, I and a whole bunch of folks are going to be going live at Chicago Cider Summit. So let me tell you a little bit of the lineup that's going to be happening there. So first off, note, if you're going to join the live streaming, again, at the Cider Chat YouTube channel, it goes live in Central Time, 1 p.m. So 1 p.m. Central Time will be going live. And the first thing we're going to be showcasing is the Escancera competition. Now, this is a high pour. The competitors, I guess you call them, will have a bottle of cider over their head and a glass down low in front of them below their belly button, and they have to get it into the glass, and may the best pourer win. Alexis Cassidy and myself will be giving you a blow-by-blow on that, and you can find Alexis online at Cider Minded. Then next we'll have Alan Shapiro, who is the founder of Cider Summit, speaking with Mary Kay Devine, who is part of Women Employed. And Women Employ is part of the co-sponsor for this event, and we want to hear a little bit of the work that they're doing in Chicago, so that really excites me. Then we'll be hearing from Deidre Birmingham of the Cider Farm, which is based in Madison, Wisconsin, which is really not that far from Chicago. So that's kind of cool, hearing what's going to be happening there at the Cider Farm. And then it's Vermont Cider Company will be in the house. So we have some reps from that scene, some women reps. You noticing this thread? Yes, we are showcasing women. And this really came because Alan was, once again, inspired by the Celebrating Women's Cider Dinner that I did back in November. And he wanted to do this in tribute to his mom, and his mom did just recently pass away. So I just love this man for doing this. And of course, you know, we are a little bit like not always seen women in cider, even though we're pretty big voices. We're not always seen. So I like taking this opportunity and using this platform for that. So we'll have Vermont Cider, and then it's going to be Ambrosia Borowski. Chicago's in the house there with Ambrosia. Ambrosia did the Calvados and American Apple Brandy tasting with me at Saturdays 2.0. And we'll also have at the same time Michelle Foyk of Eris Brewery and Cider. That is also a Chicago brewery and cider house. Anybody coming to CiderCon that week's got to go to Eris. I love both these folks. I mean, boo. So that's from 1 to 2. A lot packed in there. And then later on, from 5:30 to 6:30, we're going to have a new co-host, and that's going to be Malika Tyson of At Cider Psalms. And we'll be, again, speaking to Alan and Mary Kay Devine. And then Eleanor Leger of Eden Specialty Cider in Vermont will be on live stream. And then Ava Davis will be stepping in for Malika. And Ava Davis can be found online at PNW Cider Girl. And we're going to be speaking to Louisa Spencer of Farnham Hill Cider and Poverty Lane Orchards in New Hampshire. And also Elizabeth Ryan will be coming on afterwards to talk about the Hudson Valley farmhouse cider scene that she does. So some cool folks lined up. Who knows what else will happen? Check it all out at the Cider Chat YouTube channel. You know I'm going to be having a blast. We're going to be doing a toast with each of these folks. So you know what happens to me. I'm going to be doing these little live streams myself called Bottles on My Desk. I think I will have one before this even goes live. So I might be slurring my words, but hang in with me. We're just having fun in the best kind of way with a full glass of cider. Well, it is indeed February, and this is the month for the New York International Cider Competition, which is taking place on the 19th of this month. So you're really kind of running down to the final time when you want to send in your cider. This is specific for commercial cider makers. It is put on and founded by Adam Levy, aka the Alcohol Professor. You've been hearing from Adam for a number of episodes because they are sponsors of Cider Chat and have sponsored this podcast every year to talk about the competition, which really thrills me because I like this competition for a very specific reason, which is that it isn't a cider judge like myself. Now, I also love other competitions too, but I think this one really stands out because the judges are trade buyers. So they're not looking at your cider in that traditional way of going through the full profile. Why is that a little funky there? Or am I getting a little bit of buttery? What's that about? What's happening? No, they're looking at price point and whether or not this cider will sell within that category. And that's rather unique. And that's what Adam Levy does. He has set himself apart in the competition arena by providing this not only for cider, but for beer and spirits and sake and now cheese and I think chocolate. So he's really expanding his scope. And he's going to tell you best about this on why folks like this particular competition. So let's roll to that now with Adam.
One thing that really stands out for me about how we run the Alcohol Professor, the Cheese Professor, the Chocolate Professor, is that we take no liquor advertising. I don't want you, the producer, or the consumer think that because ABC Cidery bought a banner ad on our website, they get a gold medal. Now, if the New York Cider Association, the California Cider Guild wants to buy a banner, that's fine. But you, the individual producer, cannot buy an ad on our site. We run clean. We've been doing this for many, many years, and we run a clean operation and a clean competition, and we don't take any advertising dollars. We don't do advertorial. We don't say you buy a banner ad, you get a gold medal. That's not our company. That's not our competition. I'm doing this for the next 20 years until my liver gives out or I get gout or whatever may happen before that. But we run clean. So please check out our content, look at our sites, and enjoy the content. It's good stuff.
Perfect. And if you drink well, your liver's going to be fine and you're not going to get gout. It's all about your...
You can say that too.
Exactly. If you are a commercial maker and have not yet entered the New York International Cider Competition, go to nyicidercompetition.com and use the following promo code, CHAT23. It gives you $10 off your entry and also helps to support Cider Chat. Once again, that's nyicidercompetition.com, chat23. Up next is our featured presentation, which is a roundtable talk on preserving historical varieties of apples and pears. This is pre-recorded at Maine Apple Camp 2022. This talk is moderated by Matt Kaminsky, who was on Cider Chat in episode 346, talking about on why pomological exhibitions matter. And joining Matt is an amazing list of folks. We have Dan Bussey, who's the author of Illustrated Apples of Canada and North America. That's a total encyclopedia everyone should have. Dan Newman, who's a historian of apples and pears in Maine. John Bunker, who was on the last 2 episodes of Cider Chat, many episodes of Cider Chat. Just Google John Bunker, Cider Chat, and it'll all come up. Also, Eliza Greenman, who was just on Cider Chat episode 349, talking about the superpowers of Bradford pears. That was my title for her talk that was given at Maine Apple Camp. She did the keynote address. And then we also will hear from Lydia Pendergast, who is a student at College of the Atlantic and doing work on this topic in Maine. It's an amazing conversation. I know, like me, you are going to enjoy it. So let's roll to that now. We'll be hearing from Matt Kaminsky, and then you'll be hearing from Dan Newman, who is from Palermo, Maine. Moving on, and then the second speaker will be Dan Bussey. So now is a good time to grab a glass and join this chat.
Gathering here to talk about preserving historic apple and pear varieties with some true titans of orchard history. You know, we're a couple minutes behind here, so without further ado, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Matt Kaminsky, Gnarly Pippins. Going to introduce our panel here and let them, go around, say your name and a little bit about your work with preserving old orchards, old varieties of apples and pears, apples or pears, either or, your interest in that and anything you're working on.
Hi, I'm Dan Newman. I'm from Palermo, Maine, and my area of interest has been in pears that are from Maine, apples that are from Maine, and I do some fruit exploring, looking for old trees. And I've also recently been working on a research project using old newspapers to find records from town fairs, county fairs, grange fairs, where people were exhibiting apples and pears, and they're mentioned in these newspapers by name. So creating a database, for each fair, each year, each apple, filling it in and trying to create a record of what was grown where and when, and record by whom. But yeah, the time period that I'm finding information is basically from like the 1850s, and it really starts to drop off in the 20s to the point where orcharding is a very specialized form of agriculture, and ma and pa still have the trees out back of the farmhouse, but there isn't the interest at fairs in giving somebody 50 cents for their plate of Nodhead apples or golden sweets anymore. So we really see this sort of interest in diversity of fruit fall off around World War I. So that's kind of there's about a 70-year period where I really have a lot of information.
I'm Dan Bussey. I've been growing heirloom apples for about 42 years now. I started back about 1980. And when I started collecting old varieties, I started with heirlooms, which was fun. I blame it all on one book I read back in 1979, which got me really fascinated with the names of apples. So for the stupidest reason, I love the names. I started growing varieties, and I found, gosh, these are pretty darn good. And one thing led to another. Frustration is what drove me to start collecting whatever information I could on the varieties I was growing, which led to that little publication that's out there on the table some time ago. Oh, and I did this all without internet libraries to find things from. So all those sources, that's why I need glasses now. It's been seriously fun. I grew up in the middle of our old family farm orchard, and I was always surrounded by old apple trees, so I knew I had to plant trees when I was homesteading. And my mother taught me how to dig trees and put them in the ground. And my father worked for a fertilizer company, and one of his jobs was to create duck habitat. So at the age of 10, I learned how to set fuse into blasting caps into dynamite and for blowing stumps and potholes. And I decided to take the choice of less danger and plant apple trees. So, anyways, it has been seriously fun and seriously rewarding, and it's fun. It's amazing what a person with passion can do, even without any special education in that, to find those things out. So I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you.
As you know, I'm John Bunker, and I'm delighted to be here. And probably one of the best moments of my life was in 2009 when I was invited to the University of Wisconsin to a group meeting that was about 15 of us or so. And at that meeting, I met this person, and I thought, oh, he's done about 10,000 hours of work that I thought I was going to have to do someday. It was just mind-blowing to learn what Dan Bussey had been doing, and he sort of downplays it, but it's just remarkable, and I don't want to embarrass him, but his little book. I call it the most important book in English ever published about apples, which I think it really is. Yeah. Somebody asked me last night, what was the point of Apple Camp? And one of the things that I just wanted to do was maybe I did, is just look around, So most of these people didn't know each other 24 hours earlier, or maybe it was 20 hours earlier or whatever. Anyway, things that I'm particularly interested in right now, I'm really interested in the work that Dan Newman's doing around newspapers, and I think that's something that I hope he'll tell us a little bit more about this morning, about how he goes about doing it. And this Dan is doing a lot of work with Ancestry. And as you get more deeply into this whole thing of historic apples, that becomes an incredibly important part of it, because then you can begin to figure out who was doing what where and how things got from here to there, and synonyms and all that sort of stuff. So those are two things in particular that I hope to hear more about today. And one of the things that I'm really interested right now in is the whole notion of DNA. And I wish that Cameron Peace could be here. He's out at Washington State University, somebody we work with quite a bit. I really like the partnership between the phenotypic people, so to speak, the ones that are doing identifications through characteristics of the apple, and the genotypic people who are doing it through DNA. And they need us, and we need them, and it's been a just fantastic partnership. So that's one of the things that I'm particularly excited about right now.
My name is Eliza Greenman. I do a lot of fruit exploring, and not just with apples and pears. Currently, and for probably the last 3 years or so, I've been really into mulberries, because I live in the South, and mulberries and pears are basically the only things that are left that are of substantial age. But I have this, I feel like in a way I'm using a lot of new techniques in order to find old things. So I mentioned this last night, but digitizing archives is imperative for this next realm of fruit exploring, and making them searchable in order to go through hundreds of years of information really quickly. I live outside of Washington, D.C., and one of the benefits I have is I have a neighbor who is was former CIA GIS, was finding drug cartel cocaine fields in Belize with a drone for a while, and or not Belize, but anywhere in Latin America. And so he's an excellent fruit explorer, turns out. Because he'll set up a web crawler through some of these archives and things, and then he'll triangulate, and it's total CSI pomology. This is something that I'm really into, and it's such a thrill, and he's into it too. And so it's kind of like we're at this moment in time where I don't have to own the books, and like I don't have time to go through the books. If you're in a place and you're like, this looks like it might be a place for an old orchard, and you just search the name, up it comes, the names associated. It's really interesting that you can find all this stuff again that was considered lost, and some of times it's still there. A lot of times it's not, and it's a bunch of heartbreak. So yeah, a lot of what I do, I'm basically a paid fruit explorer, and I'm working right now on American persimmon and locating some of the original trees. Made this it's still an orphan crop, but made it a little bit bigger. I also ship mass locusts. I look for all sorts of stuff. So I'm happy to be here, perhaps not in so much of the apple vein anymore, but definitely with pears and then a whole lot of other fruit.
My name is Lydia Pendergast. I'm probably the youngest person at this panel and least experienced. I'm blown away to be considered up here. My work has been with the apple team at College of the Atlantic and interning with the main heritage orchard. A lot of my work has been focused on creating systems of collections and documentation, and how do we manage the information that has been gathered over the years by so many experts and incredible people. If you came to the Heritage Orchard tour at the beginning of Apple Camp, you are familiar with Registry. I've been running around telling everyone about it. It's a service through ArcGIS, the Montezuma Orchard Restoration Project, and the North American Fruit Working Group have been working together on creating a collection survey that anyone can enter trees. So a lot of my focus has been on how do we get information in organized systems and how we make it available and kind of pool resources.
Breaking from tradition here, asking the moderator to weigh in here. But anyway, my work with fruit exploring in a historical sense and a preservation sense has been on and off at times. I've had a couple projects related to this that sort of I feel were a little bit discouraging in ways that you all have experienced lots of beautiful success stories in rescuing or saving or preventing functional extinction of a lot of varieties. I had a project based in the Quabbin Reservoir region of Massachusetts with a great friend and colleague of a lot of people in this room, Al Sachs, who isn't here right now, where we were trying to find pre-Prohibition cider apples from within the Quabbin Reservoir region, which is the sort of the Metro Boston drinking water supply that is a large man-made reservoir in Massachusetts. Fascinating history. And we spent about 4 years looking for remaining trees in this area of Massachusetts, and we're unfortunately fruitless in terms of finding old grafted specimens, although we found many seedling offspring of what once was a pretty thriving apple growing area. So while there's some interesting things to be gleaned from those findings, it wasn't ultimately this sort of like holy grail that we were looking for of some place-based, now extinct Massachusetts cider apples. And so that was a really exciting idea that propelled that work for us. And I guess that might lead nicely into what I wanted to sort of give to you guys next as a question to just discuss, which is, that there's, Dan said this at breakfast, but that there's like a sense of urgency that has to come with this work, because there is, these trees have a liminal lifespan, old trees that were planted at one time and have really rapidly fallen into decline and fallen out of popular favor. There's a time limit on how long you can take to really find these, because oftentimes, as we experienced because of a few complications regarding spongy moth defoliation and accelerating the speed of decline of some trees that actually in this Quabbin Reservoir project were old grafted trees. We never were able to get any fruit off of them because the trees had been long dead by the time we actually got there. So that kind of disappointment really concretes the idea that, oh my gosh, wow, there is a sense of urgency with this work. So I wanted to see if you guys could speak to just a little bit about that sense of urgency of finding these historical things and what that means from the standpoint of engaging the public and engaging other people to get involved there, because obviously you can't do everything. So
yeah, we're having drought just about every year in Maine for I think the last 5 years maybe. That's seriously stressing trees. We have a moth here that's called brown tail that defoliates trees sometimes twice a year. It kills large mature oak trees, never mind, a struggling 100-plus-year-old apple tree. So the clock is really ticking in that regard. Definitely in Maine, we've been spared the sort of pressure of development. We've probably, lost a lot of our old orchards many decades ago, when they were either, they went back to forest or they were just cut down to, make it a hayfield again. So, we're not experiencing that, but these old trees are really suffering because of drought and brown tail. Watching trees that, especially in Palermo, trees that John documented in his first book about Palermo, and just watching these orchards, slowly die away, and some of these trees weren't really that old. They were planted in the 20s, the teens. We're generally hoping to find trees a lot older than that. So that is kind of discouraging in that sense. But as far as, I guess, outreach, I think what John has been doing, fantastic model, love for, every fair in Maine to have, an apple display and, somebody doing what John's been doing for years and doing the talks and stuff like that. I think we really need to try to step that up. And I don't know if maybe now's not the time to talk about it, but I have ideas about, how we can organize in Maine to actually maybe help make that happen, as a group of, people that are interested in that. So.
I think one thing I've found is I had a chance to probably look through the entire USDA catalog collection and scanned, I didn't scan things, but just visually, just to see what's out there. And you see the decline of the amount of varieties basically after the Red Delicious sort of came into focus. So as of about 1950, 1920, you start seeing a real serious winnowing of the amount of varieties that were offered in the trade. And it started to become a very predominant dozen or 20 apples that basically took over. And so those apples, we're already looking at, it's already past 100 years since the Red Delicious has come out. And so the amount of varieties that we're able to find is they're getting past 100 years. Now, there are certain areas of the country where trees can probably last a little bit longer. Wisconsin is not necessarily one of those. The southern part of the state is pretty good, but northern parts of the state are quite colder. And we've had some of those polar vortex winters, and I'm even seeing wealthy trees winter kill, which is pretty amazing. And so that then tells us that we have to look really hard to find the surviving trees that are still around. I think the biggest problem, as I was talking to Matt this morning, is the fact that we all know that there are rare apples out there, but the general majority of people have no idea that even this stuff exists. So it's a matter of, I think, educating people or just reminding them that each state had their own apple history, their own varieties that they introduced, their own varieties that they grew popular and offered in state fairs and were in the records like Dan's looking at here. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have at this point in time, is to let people know there are things out there. I spent the last 2 winters combing through everything I could find about all the apples that were originated in Wisconsin, which is close to 300. I think most people in Wisconsin would barely know 2 of that whole list. So it's my goal is to bring that out and try to get on avenues like public radio or whatever in the newspapers and create a stir, create a fuss. Because I think every state here, all of the people that are from all the different parts, I know a lot of people here from Maine, but there are people from all over, that we love to take pride and ownership of what we have grown in our state. We can take pride in that. So if everyone, I think, had that same sense of, what came from my state, what's really important for us to find. There are wonderful classic old varieties that are available all over the place, but take ownership in the ones that are from your home state, your hometown, and try to develop those and interest in it and see if you can find it. I like to look at this as also potential marketing for cider makers to say, this apple that I'm using in my cider came from here, this is the history, this is who grew it. And that is something that makes your cider completely unique from someone else's. It's not just the variety, but it's the history that goes with it. And I think that's the fun part of it. Something I put together is a little publication I'm hoping to get printed pretty soon is just the apples of Wisconsin. I did a real in-depth history of the apples that came from Wisconsin, and you find really fun stories. That allows you to do your marketing to your customers if you're a commercial cider maker or whatever, to have those stories and that background of the people, because I think people become more interested in, and it makes, like I said, your cider completely unique from someone else's. So, there's a lot to be said. I'm hoping if this works to do one for any state or every state around, if nothing else. So, I should live long enough, but... Anyways, there's some really fun things that we're looking at. And it's, as we were talking earlier, is how people moved and took things with them. Because we found there were a lot of people from Maine that settled in the upper Midwest, like where I'm at. And then there was traffic back and forth with varieties that were popular both there and then back here. So we know things moved, but it's still fascinating to track the people down. I'll pass this on to John, and we'll keep this discussion going.
Dan and Dan have said probably everything that Matt wanted to know. So I'll try to say something slightly different. If you do look at where we are in 2022 and you subtract 150 years, you come to 1872, and that was really the height of when there was this, massive diversity of apple cultivars. And we have found trees that are documented to be over 200 years old, apple trees, but they're extremely rare. And so really we are now, even without browntail, even without spongy moth, even without droughts, we're coming to the end of when those trees that were planted at that time, their lifespan. And so even without all these different pressures, we're really at a point now where we really need to be focusing on finding the last remaining ones. One thing that I found to be useful in my own sort of work was that I picked a variety that I knew quite well, which is Black Oxford, and which is very distinctive. And then I thought, okay, so I've found X number of really old Black Oxford trees, and it's probably about 12. And then I thought about, well, how many were planted, 150, 200 years ago, so forth. And then I started to think, okay, so if I found this many of what was planted, well, then you take a variety that's really obscure, like maybe one you've never found or don't know if you found it, and you say, okay, so maybe there were less of those planted, but that still probably means that there's 5 of those out there, or 4 of those out there, or 10 of those out there. And it's just a matter of finding them. And many of these old varieties do look very similar, but as an analogy, I have friends that have 4 or 5 siblings, and they all look really similar. And if you met them for the first time, you wouldn't be able to tell, Jane from Sally. But once you get to know them, even though they look really similar, even if they're identical twins, if you have friends who are identical twins and you know them really well, you can tell them apart instantly. Well, I think that the reason why we can't identify some of these things that we're finding is that they do look really similar. But once you really get to know them, then they will be distinctive in their own way, and they will be able to tell one from another. I believe that in Maine, and I think this would be true in any state, that many of those varieties that we think are gone, they actually aren't gone yet. And in some cases, maybe even many cases, because we have probably 50 or 60 apples that we've discovered. We know they're grafted, but we haven't been able to identify them yet. I think many of these are the ones we're looking for. One of the great things about what Dan Newman is doing, one example is there's a town called Washington, which is right adjacent to Palermo where we live, and he has a list now that he gave me of, 50 or 60 apples that were documented to be in Washington. And then when he found a really old orchard there and gave me some fruit, I think I was able to identify at least one really rare one because of his list. It really helps to know what something might be if you know what it might be. I know that this was grown in this area with finding those oldest trees. There's still a lot out there that we can find, but the time is now. And this year in central Maine, we have a very poor crop, which is just the natural cycle. Last year, we had a phenomenal crop. I think that there is still a fair amount of fruit out there, and we can do some of this work this year. For us in central Maine, what we really want to do is be really focused on 2023, when many of these oldest trees will be producing their last crop, and be ready to don't do anything else from no apple camp next year. No, from August to November.
Yeah, I'll just echo this whole line in saying the time is now to go out and find this stuff. You can't wait. You can't put it on the back burner, because just as an example, I watched down a mile away from where I live, there's this old tree, and I was just watching it, looking up the fruit, trying to look up the history. I had a list of apple cultivars it might be based on who used to own the property. And I had narrowed it into, okay, this is a Loudon Pippin. In January of this year, the property sold secretly, and the person immediately cut down the tree because it was half dead. To me, there's a real problem with people's perception of old trees, in that if they have any rot, if they have any death on them, people assume that they're sick. And they're doing them a favor by cutting them down, putting them out of their misery. And it's maddening. So this is something I work on a lot, is talking about heart rot, talking about how incredible ecologically heart rot is, and also it's not killing the tree. And just trying to really trying to get a different narrative than the arborist one that is controlling, that's basically doing in all the old trees, at least in my area, is yahoos with chainsaws. Yeah, if you look at the Of New York series, Cherries of New York, the book's this thick. And same thing for pears, same thing for apples. And it's a real loss of biodiversity. And so based on what we have now. And so my whole business that I own, Hog Tree, is set up on giving these fruits an untraditional baseline use in order to try and save them. Because I'm telling you, nobody wants to eat an apple that's ripe on June 15th in the South. It's 92 degrees when you eat it off the tree, and it's so acidic, you don't want it. It's mealy. But there's a use, we can't just discard it. It's got to be there, because we don't know what untapped treasures are in that DNA. And so my business Hog Tree started looking at solely just at drop dates of when these fruits are ripe. And this isn't just apples, it's a lot of things, but apples is what I started with. And setting up basically paddocks of fruits that drop at the same time. So you can rotationally graze your livestock, and it's helping to offset their feed costs. It's giving them something else to eat. And so just trying to figure out a way to make it eat, of course you want these trees that are all going to drop in June because it's going to help feed your pigs. It's going to help, it's going to help feed your sheep. And just turn it into like a commodity almost, and so that's something I've been interested in, is sort of preservation through getting it back into farmers, because I'm also totally disenchanted with government and university repositories that are getting cut down, losing funding, nobody's holding them accountable, and we're losing precious resources. And if you don't happen to know somebody that's saying, hey, we're getting rid of like this whole repository, do you want it? It's gone. And so just figuring out ways to get these trees in a very practical manner onto working farms and getting them out in huge numbers is something that's really important to me.
Thank you guys for weighing in on that. I think Eliza's point, maybe to turn it back to you three gentlemen, about what some of the successes and challenges of actually doing that, the preservation part of it, rather than the methods of detection, which obviously is a huge focus of John's most recent book. But the next piece in there, which is, all right, how do we go from the place where we decided, oh, wow, we very likely have found a very rare apple or pear that really needs to be in conservation. What are some of the challenges or successes or tips that you might pass along with making that jump from being in a threatened kind of situation to being in conserved status, if you will?
I feel that the conservation status of a lot of this information is always very precarious, and we've seen this at the Heritage Orchard as we've entered now a third year of drought. We've lost quite a few trees, and thinking about the importance of documentation with these trees. In a lot of cases, we have started to reach out to our stewardship program that we did through FEDCO to try and figure out who has backups of these trees. And it's an amazing partnership that we have with FEDCO, that people can get historical varieties that are in the Heritage Orchard. That said, we do have a very precarious situation where, with fire blight moving into the state, we're losing more and more trees. And having backups and information and good documentation surrounding all of this fruit and being very systematic about this, I feel, is the most important way to move forward, because collection is only as good as the documentation on the collection is, and the fruit is only as good as the information that we have on the fruit. And a really great piece that we've been working with is with the genetic information, and getting that genetic information has given us the chance to learn more about trees that we don't see the fruit on and gauge the importance of them.
Dan Bussey.
I think some of the issues we have is knowing what's out there. I always thought it was important not to spend a lot of time looking for a variety that's obviously in a collection someplace, so I can devote my attentions to something else somewhere later. So for kind of a short-term project, I cataloged all the varieties I could find in collections, and I think it was around 6,000 or so. It's really nice because then you have to look at the nomenclature to make sure that it's the same. Names sometimes are used for different apples, of the same name, that is. And one collection story I'll relate is I was the orchard manager for the Seed Savers Exchange for 6 years. And that was really kind of fun. It was a neat place to work for, and their collection was wonderful. They started with around 750 varieties, and when I got there, it was down to 550. So I spent my time looking for those 250 that were missing. And unfortunately, a few years later, I basically doubled the collection to 1,500. And anyways, things didn't always get planted out. But there was an orchard that they had surveyed in the area back in 1989. It was called the Lohman Orchard, and it was not too far away, and I finally tracked down where it was. It had not been in operation for a long time. They had done a survey, and the last surviving Lohman, Ole Lohman, went through the orchard with some of the people from Seed Savers and cataloged every tree that was existing. The Ole knew exactly every tree, so they had written it down, and in that list were about 5 varieties that I've never seen anywhere else, and so I knew I had to go and see it. So I started looking at the Seed Savers collection, and none of the varieties that were in the Lohman collection were in the Seed Savers, and I wondered how in the hell that happened. Found the orchard, and I got a hold of the trees. In one case, it was the largest apple tree I've ever seen in my life. It was just huge, and it turned out to be a variety called Yankee, also known as Winter King. It was a failed root sprout that came from Winona, Minnesota, and it's the only surviving tree that I know of. And the beautiful thing about it, in one of the large branches that was coming off the main trunk was the tip of an aluminum tag. Kind of wiggled at it, and it was pretty stuck. So I got a chisel, and I kept opening it a little bit, and there was the name of the apple, still legible on aluminum with pencil from all these years, buried in this trunk of this tree. So I knew which one it was. And that was the case with several. I mean, that was a gift to find that. And so I got cuttings of it, and I got cuttings the next year. And then later that year, I went back to this orchard to look at the trees and how they're doing. Every single one was gone. They had bulldozed the whole place, and they had ground all the stumps, and none of them exist. But we've got them. Wow. That's the story that... So sometimes you just get darn lucky, and that was a gift, and have them all identified practically. There's a bunch that I don't have, and I'm growing them out currently, but I know what they are. I just have to find the name that fits the apple as it comes. So that's another process. And there are many stories just like that. We've all found trees that look pretty precarious, and all of a sudden they disappear, just like you were saying, Liza. And that's what we're up against, is the landowners had no idea. They allowed me to come in and look at the trees and get cuttings, but after that, they just got rid of the whole lot. Those things happen.
When I was working on my book about the history of apples in Palermo, which I really wanted to do as a gift to the town because I was from away, and a lot of the old-timers had been very kind to me, and I wanted to do something in return. And the thing that I knew the most about were the apples in the town, and many of the old-timers who were my parents' age or older, they already had lost the knowledge of the names of the varieties. I had gathered a bunch of stories. I keep a journal, so I was able to figure out, I go back and look and see that I, learned about this variety here, whatever, this date, that date, et cetera. But then when I was really getting into writing my book, I decided I would call certain people around town and get them to tell me stories. And I told them that I wanted any story, but it had to have apples in it, no matter how obscure. And several of them told me that they or their parents had cut down the orchards and that now they wish they never had. And Dan was mentioning cutting them down for hay fields. That was one of the primary things they did. They just didn't know. I think a lot of it is about educating. And by educating, I don't mean unsolicited advice. That comes off as criticism. I mean putting it out there in whatever way you can. I like to say, I heard an interview once with a famous jazz musician, I can't remember who it was, and they were asking him how he got into playing the saxophone. And he said, well, I was walking down the street with my mother when I was, 4 or something, and I looked in the music store window and I saw the saxophone and I said, that's it. And what I like to say is we should all be the saxophone in the window. We don't know how we affect people by what we do a lot of the time, but we need to put it out there in whatever way we can. For me, it's, giving talks at, historical societies or garden clubs or having a display at a fair or, whatever. But to try to answer Matt's question about preservation, private collections do have their challenges. It's great to be collecting stuff on your own land. It's really important. That's a really good place to begin. But eventually, I think that forming a partnership with someone, whether it's a land trust or an organization like MAFCA or whatever, wherever you are, that will help to ensure that this plant material is saved beyond you. And I think ultimately for all of us, that's the goal, that we want to keep this thing going, beyond ourselves. Because I had very limited cleared land originally, I was putting 5, 10, 12 varieties on a tree. And that was my way of saving stuff. And it worked really well. It allowed me to research varieties, photograph them, save them, because a lot of the original trees from which I took sign wood, they're all gone. Some of them have been gone for decades. But ultimately, I found that my trees, one variety would take over, and the other ones would start to die out. And if something has, anyway, I think ultimately you want to have, if possible, one variety per tree. That's very difficult if it's your own collection, because when you start getting up to, 30, 40, 50, whatever varieties. So eventually what I'd like to see is a heritage orchard of some sort, not necessarily apples. It could be peaches or persimmons or pecans or whatever, in every state. And so forming those partnerships with public institutions, I think, is a really important thing to consider.
I mean, I've been at this for since 2008. And it was a long, lonely road. I was a young 20s female trying to, get into this. And there was no young people around that were at all, they're all organic farmers, all organic vegetable people. And they looked at perennial people like they were crazy. And I was one of the few that was at these potlucks. And now, thanks to agroforestry and thanks to this amazing culture of fruit exploring that's been nurtured over the last decade or so, I feel like it's more so than it's ever been. There's a lot more young people. And so the idea of preservation is actually starting to get a foothold because it's not retirees getting into this because it's a romantic thing and they've got a pension. It's becoming a livelihood in ways that, so I've got a lot of good hope for that. And I will say I've got this scheme going on for preservation that I'm going to share with you all. And I truly think the answer to repositories is green burial sites. Because with green burial sites, your land has to be in conservation easement, and every internment, a percentage of the cost of those internments has to go into a trust for perpetual land care. Honestly, I think this is what should happen, is that repositories should take the form of cemeteries, preserving genetics along with memories of loved ones, cats, whatever. Because it's you cannot develop it. It's got a trust for upkeep. And so I would really love to see this idea worked out. I've paid for a consultant to talk me through this in Virginia. I've got a client I'm trying to convince to let people, to bury people on her 30-acre cornfield, kick those guys off. The ROI is way better. Green barrels you can re-bury in the same spot after 15 years. Infinite possibilities here. So In terms of preservation, I think this is a scheme that maybe has some legs. So I'd love for all of you to really get into this and explore it, because I don't have a whole lot of time to do that.
I think that's a great idea. One of my favorite places to go when I'm in Boston is Mount Auburn Cemetery. I don't know if anybody of you have ever been there, but that's what it is. It's a arboretum with gazillions of people buried there for the last 150 years. It was designed by Olmsted. It is phenomenal. Have you been there?
No.
To Mount? Oh, you got to go. It's really amazing. Mount Auburn Cemetery, and it's either in Watertown or Cambridge, or essentially right in between, and it is fantastic. And one of the greatest things about it is you can drive in there anywhere you want, so you don't even have to worry about parking. You just drive in, and and all the trees are labeled. So yes, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's some good active brainstorming happening right now. That reminds me, there's another great historical arboretum cemetery kind of combo in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a great model for tree planting and preservation of any specimens, but pointed towards our historic apple and pear varieties sounds like a really fabulous idea. Yeah, if anyone out there in the prairie lands or Midwest is interested in doing any Midwestern apple restoration, there's a really great green burial organization in the state of Kansas that's sort of attached with the Land Institute, which could be a good in for anyone if they want to, go in that direction. I don't know how many Kansas people there are here, but anyway, just throwing that out there. So I wanted to ask you guys one more question before we maybe turn it over to the crowd for some questions. But one thing that I think we've kind of glazed over so far, but which is an undeniable piece of now exploring for and confirming, suspected varieties from old trees, is this piece of now genetic analysis, and how that has been almost a really big game changer. So with a panel here consisting of some of the older generation who is doing all this stuff with phenotypical evaluation and historical document sleuthing, and then also some newer generation that's using searchable PDFs for a lot of that historical documents searching, and then also coming into this era now where we have access to the Cameron Peace's genetic testing, and other sites doing similar work with different species like that, how that's impacted your work, and also with registry, how that's another akin to this newer information technology kind of dimension of preserving historical tree crops. So
as far as technology goes, is just my research, I do it all from home right now. I don't have time to go to the library at this point. Eventually that's going to have to happen, but I have access to digitized newspapers, and more and more are coming online all the time. They're searchable. That's a deeply flawed, I don't know what you call it, function, I guess. You convert these scanned images to text. It just doesn't work out sometimes. So, it gets you part of the way, and then sometimes you just have to look through years and years and years for hundreds of hours of newspapers, page by page. That's just part of it, but at least I'm at my house and I can, do it after the kids go to bed and stuff like that. So, as far as the DNA thing, it's kind of mind-blowing. I think at first Apple Camp we were kind of still thinking about DNA as, if you're looking for, Apple X and you test it, but, you have no Apple X to compare it to, well, what's it matter? Well, now there's this incredible database of thousands of apples, so you actually can find something meaningful, when it comes back, this grafted tree is unique, unknown, and it's been compared to thousands of apples. Well, that's a pretty cool, piece of information to have, so then you can go back to the phenotypic stuff, you can go back to the books, the fair records, all of that, and, try to identify it. I've increasingly become of the opinion that identification is probably going to be rarely doable for a lot of stuff that we're finding at this point that doesn't actually match something in the DNA record. If it was an interesting tree and it was saved, then that's what matters. We can use provisional names. We can do, probably. I found a russet in the town of Union. Came back unique unknown. Is it the Union russet that I see in the fair records? I don't know. There's probably nobody alive that could tell me. So we kind of call it, the Sennebec Road russet. If we find another one in Union, cool. But still, I have no description of what the Union russet is. It's a russet. It's from Union. And if I find a bunch in the area, it could maybe graduate to probably Union russet, but we're still limited.
I was fortunate to spend some time with Nick Howard. I don't know if anybody knows him, but he's a DNA geneticist who was a grad student with Dr. Jim Luby from the University of Minnesota, and it was he that discovered the true parents of the Honeycrisp. The records that the university had were incorrect, and so we did a lot of tissue sampling from the collection at the Seed Savers, and got to learn how to do that and work with them and stuff. And then, of course, we always find that some of the trees, of course, have been mislabeled for a long time, and so that can sort of skew your data. But then it's the guys that, like the phenotypical characters like we are, that know the apples, and we can say whether this really is as a backup to that genotypical data. So it's nice to have the fact that both of us are important to the identification of varieties. That is really essential. So we always have to have another way to corroborate some of these things that are coming out that we find are definitely not true. So it's a work that the DNA work is just phenomenal. I think it's going in so many places, but it is limited because of the amount of material that we're able to enter into it. We have to trust our gut a little bit and see whether some varieties fit what little description perhaps there are. And in the case, it's that russet that you were talking about. Yeah, who knows? It could be. Why not?
I think that the PDFs and the searching online is hugely important, and all of the people I know who are doing extensive writing about fruit and about many other subjects, but we're talking about fruit, all tell me how their writing has changed so much for the better or whatever by what they can search for online. But I'll also say that sometimes there are certain books, it is so nice to own certain books and to have them in your hands. And one of them is Apples of New York, the S.A. Beach two-volume set. As far as the DNA thing, when I first met Cameron Peace, who works a lot with this fellow Nick Howard that Dan was just mentioning, I thought, my work is over. I'm done. And then I realized that actually we need each other. We as historians, whatever. And one of the things both Dans have talked about, expanding the sort of data set of what we can compare to, where we as historians can really help the DNA people, is that what we need to do is one by one, we need to expand the reference panel, that to which the DNA is compared. Because if it's not in the reference panel, it'll come back as unique unknown, and it may be a relatively well-known variety amongst the historians. So we have a group that Lydia referred to, where we meet via Zoom twice a month. And one of the things that we're beginning to do is to develop a system where we can, through phenotypic descriptions, begin to one by one add varieties to that reference panel so that as the DNA comes in from different places, it can be compared to what we know and what we're learning to expand the capacity of the DNA work. That's one of the most fun and exciting things about this work, is how we, as sometimes the academics call us citizen scientists or whatever, but how the academic community, the scientific community, and the non-scientific community are beginning to work together, respecting each other, and actually having a lot of fun together, getting to know one another, and seeing how important this work is for all of us. One of the things, we had this meeting in Geneva 5 years ago where we were able to get a bunch of these people together in the same room, and one of the academics there, everybody had a chance to give a short presentation, and one of them said, he was a retired professor at Cornell, and he said, in all my life, I've never been to a meeting like this. So there was a division, and that division seems to be breaking down now in a really positive way. Anyway, there's a lot to look forward to in the collaboration between those of us in the, call it the non-scientific or historic realm, and those of us in the scientific and more academic world.
With my job with Savannah Institute, I'm putting together a tree crops improvement program for a handful of crops. And the only other person I work with is a PhD plant breeder geneticist, who it's really been eye-opening to me to understand how much faster we can start breeding crops thanks to the sequencing of the genomes for a lot of these crops. And so I'm going to try to lay this out in the most lay way I can, in that it's really cool, and truly, like, fruit exploring has a huge part of what I'm doing for a lot of these orphan crops. I'm not working with apples, because other people are, but finding old trees that of note, in the record or whatever, taking seed from those trees, not grafts, just seed, and growing that out, and basically creating like this it's a training population. You watch what's coming up, and in years, 1, 2, 3, it doesn't even have to fruit. If you're going after if you're breeding for cold hardiness, you're looking at the amount it's dying back. If you're looking at vigor, you're looking at disease and pest resistance. All of these traits that you're witnessing just from this training population of really great that are coming from really great parents can eventually be tracked back to their genetic bases. And so we're totally able to connect these traits to a genetic base, and then from that training population see, like, okay, well, that tree and this tree have the highest amount of traits that we're looking for, and they're actually on different markers. So it might be like more, you get more bang for your buck. Let's breed those together and predict that their offspring is going to be much better than any sum of what's going on. We're able to speed this up. I am very pro sequencing. Of course it can be used for evil. Shout out to the American Chestnut Foundation. But yeah, so I'm just very excited about the fact that we can take orphan crops, we can apply fruit exploring. Like, I have a very valid role in this, working with academics and creating the next best crops, tree crops, and it's really cool. One thing I will say is that if you do end up working with academics, sometimes they will refer to us as a class as amateurs, and to not get mad or like officially leave the Google chat, or whatever, because I'm a professional, damn it, but that's what we're called a lot of times in academic circles, amateurs. So you can push back gently, but don't get upset about it.
I think I've been reflecting a lot recently, hearing stories from Dan and from John about how different entering the world of historical research has been for me. I started my work study position doing historical research at COA right in the middle of the pandemic. The libraries were closed. I was working solely from my computer and trying to find what was online, and I'm a huge fanboy of the digital Maine archives that are being built right now. I've recently been working on a project through MAFCA with digitizing our old MOF&G publications. The advanced technology that we're seeing in digitizing and the fact that so many of these documents can become accessible has been really amazing to me, and I think it's through the interest of us as a group and through people asking libraries and asking for these resources to be made that this will become possible, and that this technology will continue to improve and be usable and connect us and help us gain more information. Being able to see how the genetic information and the historical information can work together in the ways that John has said has been amazing as well.
Hooey, what an amazing conversation yet again from Maine Apple Camp. I hope you found it as informative as I did. You'll be able to find more info at the show notes, links to the folks mentioned in the entire episode, some of the episodes that I was referring to with Matt Kaminsky and Eliza Greenman and John Bunker. And, of course, to MAFCA. That's a Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association that is behind Maine Apple Camp. And do know that Maine Apple Camp is a biannual event, so the next one will take place in 2024. So a good way to know about that is by joining MAFCA. Just go to mofga.org. There is a Q&A that was part of this whole conversation, but unfortunately, I only have so much data that I could put up at my host site, because the more I put up, the more expensive it is for me to be able to do that. And so this is my ask to you. If you've got some value from the podcast, you like listening to Cider Chat, and you want to help support it in any way you can, do consider hitting the donate button at ciderchat.com or becoming a patron of Cider Chat, which is going to help you get those little extra audio pieces, such as the Q&A from this roundtable and a lot more audio that is there currently. A good way to do that is just to Google Cider Chat and Patreon. It's spelled Patreon. And if you want to do like Press Then Press did, join at the Cider Going Up campaign level. It's only two bottles of cider per month for a cidery. I know for some cideries that is just way too much. But maybe there's a cidery that you're doing well enough that you could feel like, hey, I want to support the longest running cider podcast in the world and keep these stories going up, because in that roundabout way, not only does it keep me informed, but it helps keeping cider going up around the world. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rio Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like pomes, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like pomes, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Oh yes we do. We like pomes. Oh yes we do. We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There is a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Ba-da-da-dum. We like pomes. Oh yes, we do. We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!